Creative Assembly finally broke their silence and have provided us with a show and tell live stream just last week, and apparently they've been cooking.
We're cooking.
Medieval 3 sounds cool. I'm excited for Lords of the End Times, but we're here for 40k. They showed off a planet and some maps, spoke about regions and capturing worlds, and dived into a bit of battle map variation, of which I have thoughts. So let's get into it. Straight off the bat, I immediately got Populous vibes, which is a pretty ancient game made from Bullfrog Studios way back in the day by one Peter Molyneux, who was, I think he was the Todd Howard of the games industry before Todd Howard became the Todd Howard of the games industry. And this is the box of Populous, the beginning that I have on my wall. This was a fun-ass game. But I'm going way off topic, sorry, let's get back on track. They go on to mention that this is not final art, although back in the good old days, you know, a Total War game would come out, and it would be the kind of thing that people would want to upgrade their PCs for, because they were always kind of on the bleeding edge, visually at least. I remember seeing Shogun 2 for the first time, and I mean, that game just, it ticked every single box and encapsulated everything there was to encapsulate about the Japanese Sengoku Jidai period. It was phenomenal, and hopefully, you know, by the looks of things, I think Creative Assembly are well on their way to recapturing that magic and doing the 40k setting justice. When talking about the Hive cities, they mention rogue connections.
We can see the Hive cities on there. We've got rogue connections.
I've got no idea what they're talking about. I've read a 40k novel or two in my day, and I may have painted a handful of minis, but I'm not too sure what a rogue connection is, if that's, I don't know what they're referring to. Maybe you guys can help me out down in the comments below. That would be appreciated. I'm not sure if they're referring to rogue traders or something else. Who knows? They then went on to discuss that taking over a planet involves capturing multiple regions or continents, right? So that is going to be an unknown amount of battles that, by the sounds of things, they want to start off on the outskirts of the primary points of interest, in this planet's case, the Hive cities, and you'll start in these sort of sparse wasteland type maps and then become slightly more denser and denser sort of variations of these maps until you capture the Hive city itself. So my assumption here is that planets will have various forms of capital cities, and once you capture enough of those capital cities, then the planet's yours, I guess. That's probably how it's going to work. I don't see how it could work any other way. They then went on to mention that they have all the assets and tools in place to create essentially infinite variations of the planet. So I'm guessing from a galactic map point of view, you're going to have lots of diversity and variation in how these planets look and feel, and the various biomes that these planets will make up, which is all good stuff. They only showed this wasteland hive style in the live stream, unfortunately, so hopefully soon. They did mention by June we should see more of their voracious marketing engine kicking into high gear, which I honestly thought that we'd start seeing a lot more by, what, March? It's now May, so I was wrong there, I guess. They then segued into the battle map stuff, and I think this is interesting. They do seem keen on creating lots of variety, right, in terms of being able to change the orientation at which battles begin. So classically in Total War games, it's north versus south or south versus north. Now they want to be able to reorient that to create more configurations, which, you know, one of my previous videos I spoke quite heavily about repetitive map fatigue syndrome, and it doesn't sound like they're going to be creating any kind of procedurally generated battle maps, which is, I don't know, it's an interesting direction, because my I don't want to call it a concern, but I feel like one of the biggest issues that we have with Warhammer 3 at the moment, especially during a long campaign, is that you find yourself fighting on the same maps over and over again. This problem is only going to be exasperated in Total War 40k, because you've got an entire galaxy out there filled with planets, and at the end of the day you're fighting on the same maps over and over and over again. I do think this is something that they should sort of deal with at an early stage to create some kind of like variety and stuff. You know, maybe the procedurally generated or AI assisted stuff is just not good enough. So maybe, you know, handcrafted stuff is the way to go, but they're creating a lot of variety by this new configuration system in the way that you fight the battles or the way that you start the battles. But I would be very interested to know what you guys think. Will getting the same dozens, hopefully dozens upon dozens of maps be enough of a variety? You know, if they're all slapping including different flavors on them. Some will be ice versions, and then you'll get the wasteland versions, and then you'll get the desert versions, coupled with the various configurations that you can initiate the battles in. I don't know, hopefully this is enough to keep it feeling fresh, but I guess time will tell. They also continue to emphasize the destruction of the environment and the buildings and the various assets and trees, etc. that we find on the battle maps. They've mentioned this before. It's probably the thing that most people who are following the project are sort of curious about. For me personally, it's really just about how's the AI going to interact with and engage with this system. Will it understand destruction? Will it try and use destruction of the environment, destroying cover and all this type of stuff against the player? How much of an actual gameplay impact will this stuff have? They talk about opposing forces getting stuck in a cover-to-cover battle and then having to break that with, you know, some form of ability like an orbital strike, or units that have the ability to close the gap and unstuck the cover-to-cover battle, which is interesting, I guess. I think it really just depends on how we see our units and how responsively they react to the cover and how much of an impact it actually has on your health and, you know, ability to sustain damage. So it's really the practical side of things that we're going to need to see to really get an understanding of this. So until then, I guess it's all just speculation. They also mentioned that when you join a battle on a planet, you could be joining a battle that is already in progress. The obvious example here being the Astra Militarum embattled on a planet, and then you come along with your Space Marine chapter, and interestingly, they state that you can either opt to help them or ignore them, which will probably translate to some kind of campaign-related benefit or, you know, diplomacy points or favor for that faction. You can imagine a very rare event where there might be Eldari that are already embattled on a planet, and then if you come along as the Space Marines, you could opt to help them, and then that might open up some campaign-related choices or strategies that otherwise weren't available to you. I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. They then circled back a bit to discuss more about the dynamic cover and destruction system, stating that in older Total War titles, that structures and the density of maps were basically obstacles that the player needed to work around, and here in Total War 40k, it's all optional provided you have the firepower to remove them. Which again, it sounds great in theory, but we need to see this in practice to gauge its worth as an addition to the franchise. They use the example that a highly ranged focused army would, you know, want to get rid of this cover as soon as possible, especially up against like a brawler heavy type army. You know, will tactical usage of destroying or keeping cover impact that pivotal campaign battle that, you know, you win by the skin of your teeth because of the dynamic cover system? Hopefully it does go that deep, but again, we will have to wait and see. Important to note that they do mention that not everything in a battle map will be destructible. They then finished off by having Vice President Roger on the live stream, and they asked him a couple of questions, and I thought it was just worth mentioning. One of the questions was, what are they doing about the fact that most Total War games, the games just kind of become super easy and the AI don't really pose much of a challenge as time goes on or as a campaign ramps up and the end game kind of becomes a, you know, a snowball? And he answered the question by kind of skirting around it. He spoke a lot about design intent and that they have a lot of expert game designers working at Creative Assembly, and spoke about how Total War as a franchise has been built upon itself over and over and over again. Kind of a nothing burger answer, unfortunately. Now, Creative Assembly have got a hardcore dedicated player base, and it would be a shame if they did not acknowledge and do everything in their power to improve on the future titles. It's just that simple. Take the problems that the players have and fix them. Because with Medieval 3 and Warhammer 40k, with the new engine and all the new bells and whistles and everything, there's no longer the spaghetti code excuse. By all the logic in the universe, these two new Total War titles should not suffer from the same problems of the past titles. But I guess, again, for what, the 5th time I've said in this video, time will tell. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. But before I go, I think it's worth mentioning, Dawn of War 4 has been ramping up the releases of their trailers for various factions, and it feels like a release may be imminent. I am definitely going to be doing some more coverage on that game. There's some interesting discussion topics that I want to tackle there, and I'm basically sitting here thinking and hoping that that game will have a very healthy multiplayer scene, because I would love to start getting into some good old real-time strategy gaming goodness. It's been something that's been missing from my life for a while. So yeah, let's all hope for the best for Dawn of War. The Adeptus Mechanicus faction for that game just got a new trailer, and they're looking sick as hell, but the story trailer before that, I'll reserve my opinions for another video. Okay, cheers.